Good evening, everyone. I'm Rachel Person, event manager for Northshire Bookstore. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight and for your support of independent bookselling. It is a crazy business at the best of times, and in the last couple of years, we have more than ever been deeply appreciative of the incredible loyalty and support of customers like you. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for supporting independent bookselling and authors. A quick housekeeping note before we get started. Please use the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you have for our author throughout the evening. You can pose those questions at any time. We'll be saving them up for the end of the event and posing them for you at that point. You can also use the chat box to say hello at any point or make any comments that you have. That's the boring housekeeping stuff. I'm so very happy to get to be the one to welcome these authors to our screens this evening. Kara Tatelbaum is with us tonight to talk about her debut memoir, Putting My Heels Down. She is a professional dancer and choreographer. The modern dance company she founded in her 20s, Independent Dance Maker, earned accolades from publications including the New York Times, Dance Insider, The New Yorker, and The Village Voice. She's also a Pilates instructor who created Barrelates and the creator of the lifestyle brand Lazy Girl Pilates. She will be interviewed tonight by Ronit Plank, the author of the memoir When She Comes Back, and the host and creator of the award-winning podcast, And Then Everything Changed. Please join me in welcoming them both to our screens this evening.
It's so nice to be here, Kara. Mazel tov on putting my heels down. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. Yeah, I'm putting your book, Putting My Heels Down, in my hand to celebrate this wonderful publication in your memoir, which I got to read some months ago before it was actually out in the world. And I'm so happy to be able to do this with you tonight.
Thank you, Roni. I've been so excited to be here. Northshire Books, which I'm even wearing the Northshire shirt. I absolutely love Northshire Books. This is an honor to be here. And I love Ronit and her books. So this is just a thrill. This is great.
So I have to continue the love fest before we launch into our questions. Kara and I met on social media during the pandemic, actually, which is where I met so many beautiful, wonderful writers in the writing community, lots of talented women and people with energy and who wanted to forge connections. And you wrote to me and we started talking and discussing how I got my book out into the world and who I worked with. And we had one connection from college and we started talking and I said, well, why don't you go ahead and talk with my publisher? And then here we are about a year later, right? About a year. And your book is in the world. And so what I'm struck by is how this chance meeting online, because of what work I was putting out and what work you were putting out, led us to each other. And then how you now have the same publisher as I do. And these are both memoirs from Jewish women from the New York area. So, which is also a lovely connection. So how does it feel to have your memoir out in the world now?
It feels absolutely incredible. It took me 10 years to get this book published. So to be here now and have the book here is just really, really special. And unlike a dance performance where it's over and it's fleeting, this is a long life of a book. And I am just enjoying the beginning stages now of it being birthed into the world.
Yes. And so how many weeks in are you right now?
So the book launched on International Dance Day, which is April 29th. So it's exactly a month.
Oh, wow. I hadn't made that connection. It's so exciting. And I know you've been really busy with interviews and appearances and book signings. Has anyone reached out to you, any writer, a burgeoning writer, or someone with a question about how you got to this point? Has anyone reached out to you like you reached out to me?
Yes, definitely. It's been completely full circle. I have people reaching out to me about how I got my book published. I have people reaching out to me that relate to my story from inside the dance world and from outside the dance world. So it's really special to be able to make those connections when they come to me, because I certainly seek out those connections with other people.
Yes, and I noticed that right away as soon as we started talking a year ago, how warm and friendly and open you are. And I also think we connected on this performance level too, which I forgot to mention is, you were dancing and I used to act. And before I became a writer and now a mom, I was acting in New York. And I think we probably walked by each other a couple of times in Manhattan and didn't even realize it. We may have even been in a performance together watching something. But for those who haven't read Putting My Heels Down yet, can you talk a little bit about the physical obstacles you experienced in your dance career that made you feel different from other dancers?
Well, right from the beginning, I started ballet class just like every other little girl starts ballet class because their mom puts them in, and I fell in love with it. But I noticed right from the beginning, and I write about this in my memoir, that when all the little girls are sitting with their legs out in front of them, reaching for their toes, they could all touch their toes, and I could barely get to my knees. So it was clear from the beginning that my body was different, and I sort of understood that from the beginning. And it also hurt when I was reaching for my toes. I felt pain that I had assumed other little girls were feeling also. Turns out that they weren't at that time. And by the time I was 9 years old, which is the time that they say, if you're going to make it as a ballet dancer, that's sort of the age that they can tell. And I was told flat out, you are never going to be a ballet dancer. Your knees are knobby, your Achilles tendons are too tight. And of course, from the title of my book, because my Achilles tendon, from my calf was too tight, when I would land from jumps, my heels, I'm demonstrating like my hands and my feet. I'm used to doing this when I'm teaching. My heels didn't touch the floor. So that jarring landing that I had every time, the teachers would yell at me and I felt pain. So it was very clear from the beginning that I had physical differences. And then as I grew older, and I went to conservatory, and then it certainly became a professional, the pain that I was having led to actual surgeries. And I did have, real injuries that came from pushing my body when it was limited.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as you talk about it, I'm remembering all those scenes and how prevalent this feeling of trying to match up to the other girls was for you and the pain that you went through. And I mean, I know that dancers go through pain because they put themselves through so many hardships to get what they want. But I feel like this added a layer to your experience that, as you said, you didn't realize was different from what the other people were experiencing. So around what age do you feel like you really understood in your dance, journey? Wow, I am definitely, facing an uphill battle with this anatomy.
I think probably from the get-go, I kind of got that. I
Yeah.
think from the get-go, I was looking around at my friends and the other little girls, and I sort of had that sense. And I think,
Mm.
when my teacher said, you're not going to make it as a ballet dancer, and they said, why don't you try modern dance? Because there's different expectations in modern dance. And then it sort of became clear, like, oh, my body wasn't exactly made for modern dance either. And I think normally, or I think most dancers, when they're told they can't be dancers, it's because of, when they say their body, it's because of their weight, and that you're judged
Mm.
on their weight. For me, I was always very skinny. So I had the skinniness that they were looking for, and that was just natural, but everything else was a disaster. So whether I was pursuing ballet or pursuing modern, it just was clear that I just wasn't fitting into that mold.
So I'm going to have you read a passage in a moment, but something I want to just ask you is, before we do this, and I hadn't planned on asking you, but our conversation is leading me, my curiosity is leading me to ask you this. What do you think made you keep pursuing it? Where did it come from to continue, even though you had these obstacles and so much writing on the wall about where it was going to be harder for you?
I'm glad that you asked that, because I love dance. I love dancing. I love performing. And when I'm performing, I don't feel any pain at all. Afterwards, I do. But while I'm on stage or while I'm dancing across the floor, my body doesn't feel pain. It feels glorious. And it's funny that you asked me, because I just saw a rendition of Chorus Line yesterday. And I didn't realize that the song What I Did for Love was actually about dance. I
Oh.
thought it was about a romantic partnership. But it's really like what you do for the love of dance. And it's I just was willing to do anything, just like the chorus line dancers sing about. I would just do anything for dance because of just the absolute joy that it does bring me.
Yes, and I think that's really apparent in your book because you just are eating and breathing and sleeping and dreaming dance all the time. And even though I was never a dancer, in fact, it's one of the art forms I just am so inherently bad at. So it's so funny, like reading your book, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a world I never could have been part of in a million years because I couldn't do it. But that's why I selected the passage that I want you to read for us. So if you don't mind, would you read that passage we talked about on page 66?
I am. I'm going to read, but before I do, I just want you and the audience to know that, or think about, when you can't dance or you think that you can't dance, who told you that or what put that into your head? Because we all can dance, and dance, is so much about being human, and it's not these days. But anyway, we
I
all can.
appreciate that. And no, I really appreciate that. And I'm not just saying, oh, that's nice of you. I mean, I really do appreciate that. And that comes through in your book as well. And that's also part of the energy that I think you bring and you must have brought to your choreography as well. And, this idea of like inclusiveness and joy and following your passion.
Okay, I'm going to start reading. So this chapter begins, I'm at Tisch, School of the Arts at NYU, and I'm deciding to choreograph a new solo. So I decided to choreograph a new solo. Up to that point, my dances had been moody and intense with titles like Fine and You and Perfect Weapon to Philip Glass string quartets or poetry. I decided it was time to lighten up. I booked myself studio space and secured a spot to have my new solo performed with Mark Dendy's premiere and other student works. For the first few performances of Second Avenue Dance Company, all students needed to do in order to perform their own work was sign up. For retro, which is the big performance at the end for seniors, 5 student works would be chosen from that pool and have the honor of being presented alongside the 4 professional choreographers' pieces. During my first rehearsal, alone in the large second floor studio, I wasn't sure how or where to start. I need to be edgy, daring, different. I stared at my reflection until I finally did something. And what I ended up doing was jumping up and down in a huge temper tantrum. It's not fair. It's never me. I'm never picked. Fueled by rage, my movements resembled the outburst of a child's terrible twos more than that of a 20-year-old. But anger usually ignited a new piece of choreography for me. Whenever rejection came from Miss Lorraine, Tisch, boys who never noticed me, I turned inward. My form of rebellion was creation. Once I had tuckered myself out with jerky spasms, I flipped through the pages of my CD collection to find the proper music. I chose the Patsy Cline CD Ashley had lent me. I pushed track 3 and Crazy became the backdrop to my angst. As I recreated my tantrum, Patsy Cline's words mocked me. Her sweet voice provoked more air punches, leg stomps, and sobs. I relaxed in the smoking lounge with my journal after rehearsal. Who is this new girl I just found? I wondered. The answer appeared on the page. She was my alter ego. The girl I had just found in the studio didn't hide her frustration. Instead, she flaunted her flaws. She called herself out on her no plie, A-cup, unibrow status and flirted with boys anyway. When she fell, she got back up, winked at the audience only to fall again. This girl was a superhuman, super freak who could make as many mistakes as she wanted with no excuses. Part dork, part superstar, this girl could laugh at miss everyone else who'd ever doubted her. I took out my journal and wrote, this girl is girlfriend. Although I was nobody's, not for several years, Girlfriend was mine. I continued to choreograph and rehearse Girlfriend for the next month. Quick, jerky movements turning up and off the floor showcased my ability to execute swift movement phrases with unexpected full-bodied flails, which climaxed with me falling to the ground like an abandoned marionette. I scrunched my face in a pretend cry, then shook my head and hips in a tantrum, landing with a bang. The piece changed personality every few seconds from girly girl to psychopath and back to just me. Using humor in a dance for the first time, I paused mid-frenzy and stared at the audience, tapping my right pointer flirtatiously to my lips along with the beat. Then, turning my back to the audience, my hands played air piano, demonstrating my musicality and nimble fingers from years of Dad's forced lessons. My hair, made full and bouncy for rehearsal, joined each movement with my newly grown out curls. With Gilda Radner's demeanor and Isadora Duncan's abandon, I expertly worked all my assets. Girlfriend was the first piece I'd choreographed since Homeless that was set to music with lyrics. At Tisch, the teachers discouraged using the crutch of someone else's words to choreograph. I agreed with this theory and was always more drawn to a full orchestra with lots of strings. More attracted to Patsy's sound than the words, I refused to memorize each stanza and completely ignored the refrain. I had my own inner story and stuck to it. As the piece grew, so did my hair. Dude, you have curls? My friends were so confused. They assumed my hair was straight since in the crew cut I rocked, it was. Yep, I accentuated my curly mop with highlights and colorful clips. For the girlfriend costume, I chose a white see-through tank top, bright red little boy underwear, and my own wild bedhead hair, figuring the choreography and skimpy getup would help distract from my short Achilles. I started working on my facial expressions and an actress in the graduate class to help me to work on my method acting. I want to be a character, I explained to her, like the girl who isn't asked to the prom, who dances in her bedroom, freaks out, and then acts like she doesn't care. All she wants is to be accepted, to dance.
Thank you so much. I just love that. And I think that really it's like encapsulates how much you folded into your work, who you really were, and how, as artists, I think, especially as writers, when we embrace the problems or the issues or the things we don't want to look at, the stuff that we maybe didn't want to write about or admit about ourselves, it deepens our work. And for me, this scene is one where you, as a young 20-year-old, understood that you didn't have to try to be like something else or someone else. You could embrace who you were, and it made your work rich and interesting and funny. And that's part of like the parallel between writing, art, dance. And so the other thing that I noticed is that acceptance is a big theme in Putting My Heels Down. Do you think dance had a unique way of making you feel like you needed to strive harder than others because of your Achilles? Or do you think that's a trait that you might have brought to any career pursuit of yours?
I think that dancers inherently are striving for perfection. So you're always trying to up yourself, up the person next to you. You're competing with yourself, you're competing with the person next to you. And I certainly embraced that competition. I have that competitive spirit within myself and with others. So I think that a lot of that does come naturally to me and maybe would show in other pursuits. And maybe it has, maybe it's showing as an author. I think that I do probably as an author. I'm a dancer author. I act like a dancer as an author. I have a lot of hustle. I work really hard. I'm always trying to be better. I'm not trying to be perfect anymore, but I am always trying to motivate and get further.
Yeah, and I see that because I see your presence, as a new author and how you are getting the word out about your book, and all the people also who are so excited for you. Even for this event, people were mentioning in comments and on the platforms that we share how excited they were for you and how much they love to talk with you and to listen to your work because of this energy and vibrancy you bring. And one thing that also occurred to me when I was reading the book is that it's such this capsule of time from the 90s in New York. I mean, it's so much about the dance world in the 90s and pursuing one's passion and trying to make ends meet, trying to figure out how to live and who we are and having a day job and trying to figure out if your dream is going to come true. And I think it's really one of the only memoirs to date written by and written by a postmodern dance choreographer's experience. So when you were writing this, were you aware that you were telling a story that hadn't yet been told? And was that important to you to tell this story?
Yeah, it's extremely important to me because most dance memoirs are written by ballerinas, ballet dancers, men that are ballet dancers, or very famous choreographers. and most often by dancers that have made it in the way that they wanted to make it. And there are very few memoirs written by dancers that didn't make it in the way that they wanted to. I think a lot of that reason is because of the shame that's attached to that. And I have made it a point, as I like to reach out to people, I have reached out to the few authors that dance memoirs that are out that do represent the smaller demographic. Actually, it is the larger demographic, because most dancers don't make it in the way, you know, that they wanted to. But certainly as a modern dancer and a postmodern dancer, which is a specific type of modern dance, there's really nothing written by the everyday dancer and choreographer, certainly of our generation. And I think it's important also that in the 90s, it was before 9/11 hit New York, the dance world was completely different. Our lives were completely different. Our dreams were completely different. Our nightmares were completely different. So when I started writing, I did have a coach that said, you know, please take into consideration that this is not only your story, it's a piece of dance history. And that meant a lot to me. And that
Wow,
is why
yeah.
I reached out to the choreographers and dancers. I named names of all of them and got permission to use names of all of them, even from like someone like Robert Battle, who's now the artistic director of Alvin Ailey. I write about an experience sharing a bathroom with him on tour before he was the artistic director. And, you know, it's a little, you know, story of little old me, a little old, you know, postmodern dancer, and like a little look into that life.
Yes, and I really felt that because, as I said, I was there in the 90s too, not dancing, but going on auditions and things like that. And when I was acting, I did meet dancers now and then. And sometimes in acting classes, dancers would come and take class because they wanted to deepen their understanding of how to perform. And for me, you know, they seemed like a different species. I mean, the dancers, you know, that I ran into were maybe like most dancers, really strong, really live, in control of their bodies so much. And I felt I was so different from that. And they always seemed disciplined and so specialized, but there was something about them that seemed like they were really in their own world. And I didn't understand it. But what I didn't grasp until I read your book, and I know we've talked about this, and it's funny that I didn't grasp it, but how strong dancers are. I mean, I had no idea exactly how tenacious and disciplined and strong dancers are. So, what do you think people are most surprised to learn about dancers?
I think dancers do seem in their own world because they are in their own world. You know, there's a time limit to how long you can dance professionally. And thank goodness it's gotten longer now. But, you know, when I was training, we certainly didn't think that you could dance in your 40s. We thought everything was over, you know, in your 30s, which for ballet dancers, actually, no, some of them are really dancing well into their 40s. So I shouldn't say that. So I think having that tight time that you can actually do this thing that you love and be an athlete and be an artist and, you know, keep up with everything does make dancers, you know, different. I think the discipline, because it's so narrow, dancers miss out on a lot of life lessons, a lot of life experiences. I think there's a naivete a lot of times to dancers because they just don't have that breadth of life experience. I think that would likely be surprising. I think dancers look perfect because they try to act perfect, and you know, they're
Is
not.
that part of it? Is that part of it is, you know, because it's a performance, like it's performative, you have to look like you have it all together?
Absolutely, you have to talk like you have it together and sit like you have it together and look like you have it together. It doesn't stop in the studio. It doesn't stop on stage. It's a way of life.
It's so interesting to me because I think a lot these days about vulnerability. And I wonder, you know, it's just a kind of a rhetorical question. I write a lot about vulnerability and I think about it as a writer and as a mom, but I wonder what role vulnerability plays in dancers coming up now. You know, like it's an interesting, like, can they allow themselves to be more vulnerable these days, or is it just as cutthroat, you know? And speaking about that, I know you've been visiting some dancers, you know, to talk about your book and giving back to the community. And it's so great that they have you as a role model and to see what your life was like and what you've made of your dance background. Something that struck me again and again in your book is how supportive your parents are and were. they are so present in your life in the book, and you write about them warmly, and they give you financial resources and they give you emotional support. And I'm curious how common that was for you in the group of dancers you came up with to have involved parents like that.
Very, very uncommon. I think most parents don't support their child's artistic pursuits, especially dance, because they know how hard it is.
Mm.
And my parents even had the teachers telling them, like, she's not going to make it. But at the same time, I was just talking to my mom about this. Like, yes, I was getting negative from my teachers. I was also getting a lot of praise. They started presenting. I choreographed my first piece at 11 years old. By the time I was 16, I was teaching 4 classes a week at my dance school, choreographing all of their recital pieces. And, the director of the school was presenting my work as if I was an adult choreographer. So I was getting a lot of good and praise as well as the bad stuff. But I think it's very rare to have parents like mine, especially from the financial end, being able to really financially support me. They helped produce my first show, which there's no way I would have had a first show if it wasn't for them, which for me was very shameful at the time. And now I'm very, very grateful. But there was a lot of privilege with that I had that most, I would say, dancers don't have. My mom wanted to be an actress. My dad wanted to be a piano player. They turned out to be a therapist and a cardiologist. So, but they always kept their love of the arts and exposed my sister and I to the arts all of the time. So it was really their dream too.
Yeah, it comes through. It's lovely because often when you read memoirs and parents are featured, there's some kind of static or some kind of difficulty with them. And with your parents and your memoir, it was sort of just this warm embrace throughout. They just were there for you, and I feel so happy that you had that as a young dancer. What do you think dance meant to you back then? Like, with the perspective that you have now after so many years and changes in your life, and now you're a writer, can you articulate what dance meant to you back then, 20 years ago, and what it might mean to you now?
I think back in my earlier days, I was a dancer and that's it. That's how I identified myself. That is how I walked through the world. That is how I danced through the world. I am a dancer. I'm a choreographer. That's it. And now that I'm older, I realize I'm actually a lot of things. I am a dancer. I am a choreographer, but I'm also other things. And I'm also looking to be other things. I'm not just riding that narrow path anymore. My eyes are open. My ears are open. My heart is open. And that just was not the case when I was younger.
Is that something that helped propel you to write your book? I mean, when did you know, I know you wrote the book 10 years ago. Is that still the accurate amount of time that
Yeah,
it
I
first?
started writing the book 12 years ago, and it started completely different. I was teaching Pilates. That was my day job, and I was really struggling with it. I really didn't like it. There were a lot of funny stories that were happening with my Upper East Side clients that I thought would be hilarious. So I really thought that I was writing this nanny diaries, Pilates diaries, tell all book. And I wasn't writing about my dancing at all. I thought I was writing this expose. And it wasn't until I saw that I might have a book or I might have something, and I worked with a writing coach, and she said, "Well, you need to write about your dance life." And then the floodgates open.
Yes, and that, I'm sorry, I have to say that, like, that comes full circle for me about what I said in the beginning of our interview, which is that when you talk about how you had to embrace your body the way it was as a young dancer, and how you had to continually work with what you had and push through obstacles and barriers, similarly, it seems so funny to me. Like, I don't know what this book would be had you not incorporated your own experience dancing, right? Like, we as readers so appreciate, I mean, the spectator is nice to be a spectator and to not get all the way into a writer's psyche, but to really understand this holistic person who's writing the book, and to really understand what makes you tick, knowing that you're a dancer is essential.
Yeah, you're right. And it's funny because I think now, I thought that the nanny's diaries would be like my money maker. That would be like my day job. And then I could just keep dancing. I didn't, I think that's how I thought. Like, I
Yeah.
thought it'd be a way for me to generate income, or I thought it would be this way to like blow up. And and I think there was so much frustration, and I just wanted everyone to know what was going on with me. I wanted everyone to know what was happening.
Yeah, and I feel like that too is something that I talk about a lot. And you and I have talked about it, just that our stories change as we grow and learn, and the perspective you have on it now might be different from what you have even in 10 more years. So, in my final question for this period, this section of our time together, um, if you could go back to the young you, the Tish you, or the newly out of tissue, and tell yourself something. Is there something you wish you could tell the younger Kara with the wisdom or the understanding that you now have?
I think younger Kara had very precise ideas about what it was to be a dancer and choreographer. I was to graduate from Tisch. I was to get into a dance company. I was to spend a certain amount of time in that dance company so that I could then start choreographing inside the dance company. And then all the patrons would get excited about my work. And then I would start my own dance company and I would tour the world. And that was how I thought that it was going to happen. That was the only way it was going to happen. And of course, that's not how it happened right away at all. So I wish I would have told myself to widen the lens. If I could at least widen it as a choreographer, what that meant to me, that would be great. If I could widen it more to keep myself open to all possibilities and not be so closed off
Hmm.
to what was going on around me because I was so tunnel visioned.
Right, which is also kind of, I don't know, because you were tunnel visioned and because you were so focused, you did achieve a lot, right? So it's kind of like, who knows? I mean, that's what kind of spurred you on. And I just thought of another question. So Rachel, before you pop back on, here's my very last question for Kara. Um, your dance friends, the people that you came up with, people that you may have lost touch with, or people who you've been friends with for a long time, what has been the response in your dance community to putting my heels down?
That's a great question because I have had quite a few people that I have not talked to in a very long time that are no longer dancing, reach out to me and say, "Oh, you were going through that too? That happened to you too?" And I'm hearing that so much. And if we all would have just talked to each other at the time and been open about our struggles, um, you know, that's that's really been a beautiful, beautiful part of making connections. And it's also connected me to my friends in the dance world that have amazing careers right now. And that's great too. And I'm able to appreciate them and not be so jealous and angry and upset that it didn't happen for me that way, because it's happening for me in a different way.
Yes, yes, I understand that. And I find another parallel with writing, because that's how we connected, which is that when I was an earlier writer, because I've been writing for about 10 years, 12 years, but when I first began writing, I didn't understand about writing community. I felt very much on my own and trying to figure out how to do this and make some inroads and get published. And then it wasn't until 2 or 3 years ago, and especially when our publisher, who's here tonight, Diane, it wasn't until I realized, I have to meet other writers and share and take what I can from them and give back and be generous, that I met you, and that I was able to understand how artists can help each other and support each other. And that's why I'm doing this tonight with you, because you asked me, because we're friends now, because I was putting myself out there and you found me and you put yourself out there. And so I guess this is just my little my soapbox is like, the more we share about ourselves, the more people can receive it. And then the more they feel empowered to share of themselves, whether that is with, visual art or storytelling art or anything. So, thank you. Thank you so much for putting your story into the world and for being brave enough to go back and dig through those memories.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Ronit. And, you have been with me from the very, very beginning and have introduced me to the most supportive group of writers and authors. I had never in my life as an artist have had the type of support that I have now as an author. And maybe I would have had it as a dancer. Maybe I wasn't open to it, but I don't know. It's a different world. And I think, what might make it different for you and I is that we came from being a different type of artist and then, evolved in our art form, what we did. But I'm so grateful to not only the authors, the bookstore, to Northshire, to all
Yes.
amazing, it's a really supportive art form.
Yeah, it's one thing to tell your story and to take that step. It's another to be embraced the way we get embraced, and Northshire Books to do this event, and for you to have all these people receiving your memoirs so warmly. It's just been a real treat to watch, and I'm so glad that we got to spend this time together.
Thank you. Me too.
This has been such fun to listen to you both, and that's such an inspiring note to transition to the audience questions on. So thank you both. It's really lovely. Audience members, you can type your questions into the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We've got a few great questions already. We have one here from Susan to kick things off, saying, Kara, did you have any dance role models when you were younger? Someone who also wasn't a, quote, typical dancer.
I write about this in my memoir, but I read about, it wasn't until I was in college, because again, I was just reading ballerinas. The big book of the 80s was Dancing on My Grave. That's certainly not anything to aspire to. That was a really devastating memoir, but when I was in college, I read Agnes de Mille, and Agnes and I actually have a few things in common. We come from she came from a very supportive family. And she talked about the way that her body hurt and how she would have to sit down sometimes, even though she didn't want to. And that was the first time I was, wait, what? And I write about it in my memoir, the moment that I was like, wait, someone else had to do this. And the conversations that she then had with Martha Graham, who would never sit down, that she would never, admit or show any weakness at all, and how that relationship was. And so I think Agnes de Mille is who I really could finally relate to.
Interesting, thank you. The next question came to me anonymously in my DMs, which audience is another great way to send a question. And it is, if you could change the way that dance is taught to make it more friendly to dancers like you, what would you change about it?
I think that dance teachers, it's the art form is passed down. And I think that every dance teacher thinks that they're better and nicer and less cruel than the teacher before them. In dance, criticism is considered a compliment. And that is still today something that is true, or not true, but taught. So I think that teachers need to teach the discipline. We need to teach proper technique. We need to also teach joy of movement, and especially now more than ever. And to look in our students, and I teach dance still, and I look in my students' faces and make sure that they're okay. And if they're struggling, I'm going to think about why. And even more importantly, I'm going to make sure that I'm okay. And I make it a point, and I talk about the magic of dance that my teacher gave me, that feeling of magic. So when I teach, and I hope that other teachers do this, I make sure that in every class, I have one moment of magic. Whether that means I put on a piece of music that I know I'm going to love to dance to, or we do a step that's one of my favorites, or something that brings me that spark of joy, because that's what I need to give to my students.
That's a lovely way of thinking about it, and one that I think teachers in all sorts of disciplines could really take some inspiration from. The next question comes from Kendra, who says, Kara, I'm curious, what, if anything, your experience of the pandemic has changed for you as someone who's passionate about live performance and connecting with people? And then she adds, also, yay, congrats.
Oh, hi, Kendra. I have not been to a live dance performance yet. I'm actually going to go on Thursday night to see the Doug Verone Company at the Joyce with an old friend that I connected with because of my memoir, that we haven't connected with. So it's going to be a big thing, a big to do. I miss live performance so much. To be honest, when I was going through my deepest struggles as a dancer, it was very hard for me to go to performances because I just felt so left out. I couldn't sit there. It became really hard for me. And so I'll see how I do on Thursday. But, I think even seeing, like, my daughter is in musicals, she's 9 years old, and even going to see her musicals. I mean, I always cry at the end of every performance. I have since I'm a child. And I still, even at the end of a children's musical, I'll cry at the end because I'm just moved. So I get it, I love live performance.
It is the best. My eldest's first band performance back, I was a crying mess there in the audience. It's amazing. The next question is from R. Reed for you, Ronit, saying, Ronit, do you think that a conversation like this might be on point for your podcast, particularly for young people struggling to relate to struggles and or pain?
Oh, definitely. I love I love to dig in. I asked Kara because, if you let me go, I'll ask all the questions. And she said, you said to me that some of the questions in their earlier form were a little like therapy. So I'm always like, let's go. I spent so many years trying not to feel and trying not to get vulnerable, and so now I'm making up for it. Yes, I have 3 podcasts, and the two other ones are not yet mentioned in my bio. But yes, I love to dig in, and I think it's a really, really good suggestion. So thank you for that.
This next question came in anonymously. Again, it's saying, what are some of your literary inspirations, and are there any memoirists who are particularly meaningful to you?
So I really love Nora McInerney, love her. I love that she's able to write about things that are really difficult and make it funny. And she's very, very relatable in her writing. She's one of my favorites. Memoirs. I'm like a dance memoir junkie. So I will name my dance memoirs that I absolutely love, which is Jessica Ribera's The Almost Dancer, Susan Prever's Dancer Interrupted, Ellen O'Connell Whittit's What We Learn in Flight, and who am I missing? Gavin Larson's beautiful memoir. So I think those are my favorites right now. But I like to read depth in memoir, but I also really like to laugh. So even someone like Ali Wong, I loved her memoir. I love Jenny Mullen's writing. I just want to laugh sometimes. So I think there's that both sides.
So there's a lot of love in the chat, notes from everyone, but we don't have any more audience questions. So I would love to wrap up by asking both of you, if you can share what you're working on now. Any creative projects, doesn't have to be writing, but like Ronit, I'd love to hear about your other podcasts that aren't in your bio. And Kara, I'd love to hear what's next from you.
Great. Kara, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Right now I'm working on, so I am now also a certified wellness and resilience coach. And I am working right now on what I'm hoping to be a companion to putting my heels down. So it would be putting your heels down, and more of a journaling, something that would be more for the reader to investigate putting their own heels down, and what that means to them, and what it means to stay grounded, but still really reach for your dreams, especially when life is tough and when we get thrown hurdles. That's not a time to let our dreams go. That's a time to keep dreaming even more. So that's what I'm working on now.
I love that idea, Kara. That is I love that all you have to do is change one word in the title, and then you've got the second volume. That's perfect. So for me, a couple of things. So I do have a short story collection coming out a little bit later this year. So my memoir came out a year ago, and that's about my mom leaving for the guru Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. Then this short story collection is just short fiction that I won an award for women over 40. So I'm excited about that. I have a novel in progress, and I'm kind of like schnovel because I'm not sure like what it's going to do. I regularly write articles and memoir essays. I write for Writer's Digest and things like that about craft. And my podcast that I'm most excited about right now is called Let's Talk Memoir. And I interview memoirists about their writing craft and their books. And we offer advice for people who are in the middle of writing their own memoir or who love memoir. And I've had some really amazing memoirists on that recently. And you can find that on Apple and Spotify.
Very cool. You both have a lot going on. That's amazing. Kara and Ronit, thank you both so much. This has been a real pleasure hearing from you both. Audience, thank you for being here and for your wonderful support of independent bookselling. I've put some buy links into the chat, and you can find both of these great books at northshire.com, as well as our schedule of other upcoming events. So please come on back and join us another time soon.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Kara. Mwah.
My pleasure.
Mazel.
This has been great fun. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.